Well, this is a very different episode of Plugged In. I'm Al Dominic, still with Steve Williams, so
Hey.
it's not that different, but typically we like to either have a guest come in or have Steve and I, go real time with some questions and conversations. But we just held our first Smarter Bank event for some 500 bank and credit union executives spread across the U.S.
All across the U.S., yeah.
And so these troublemakers tuned in to hear some concepts around what makes a smarter bank, not just in 2023, but projecting out to 2030. And so we're going to use the next 25, 30 minutes to share basically what we covered in that by taking the audio file, dropping it in so you can listen at your leisure. But we want to provide some context as to how we got to this point.
Yeah. Well, so Al, about 7-8 years ago, our chief research officer and kind of social media star Ron Shevlin wrote a book called Smarter Bank.
And for those who don't know what a book is, it's paper,
Yeah.
It's hardcover, and usually you'd have to pick it up and put it on a plane with you to read.
Yeah. But Ron's been working here at the Cornerstone team all that time, and we took that book and read it and started talking about the term Smarter Bank. We loved it because it was really indicative of how are we going to bring digitization, data, platform automation, a new talent marketplace, and have the collision of banking and fintech kind of run its course. What's it going to look like? And we think we are not going to get down to 10 banks in America. We're going to get down to this really diverse group of niched, modernized institutions. And so Smarter Bank is our call to action, and our discussion. What's that going to look like over the next 7 years?
Yeah, and being niche focused, has all of a sudden picked up a negative connotation because of concentration risk that a handful of banks in March were accused of being. But being hyper-focused, hyper-efficient, diligent and disciplined in the way that you approach opportunities, that's what a smarter bank looks like today. As Steve's talking about Ron being a catalyst for the title Smarter Bank, what struck me over the years from outside looking into Cornerstone is this real discipline around the tech strategy and creating a roadmap, understanding where there's gaps. What we try to do with this is really pull that concept forward to say to people, look, you could be running a smart business today. That doesn't mean you can't get smarter in the very near term.
Yeah, and it's a messy slog out there. We have about 100 consultants every day out there with financial institutions working on new technology, performance improvement, strategy implementation. And we try to take all those things. But what we want to tell people is if you look at all the best practices and interesting things going on now, it really gets you fired up. We should be optimistic about what we can do with the typical regional bank, community bank, credit union using the new tools.
Yeah. And so Smarter Bank, again, this is a concept that's not born in the lab. It's not Steve and I just retiring for a few hours to come up with something that's catchy. It reflects conversations we've had on Plugged In with people like Colin Gilbert, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at Valley National. It looks at things like Brent Beardall at WaFd, Jim Reeder at First Bank have shared with us about how they've set up their teams. We try to put faces and names against these concepts so you don't think it's just some pie-in-the-sky concept.
Dumb consultant theory. No, it's these troublemakers, we like to call them, entrepreneurs out there, creative folks, curious folks, trying new stuff, testing and learning, sometimes failing, but getting back up.
Yeah.
And to us, that's the conversation we want to keep having around this term Smarter Bank.
And that's why we have Plugged In, and that's why we're going to really take you, back in time to the Smarter Bank presentation that Steve Williams and I just wrapped up.
Yeah, and we hope you listen to the stories about Chip and about Brent and about Jill and about Jim and about Eric. 5 bankers you should know. Welcome.
Steve Williams, Al Dominic. We're holding it down in Scottsdale, Arizona, and by my count, it is 11 o'clock a.m. on Pacific time, 2 p.m. East Coast.
East Coast.
We're going to get into some really interesting conversations. I want to bring a little gift to my man, Steve, so that you understand I'm representing the East Coast.
You are. I'm representing the West Coast gin and juice mindset.
So we're going to talk East Coast, West Coast, really everything in between for this Smarter Bank conversation. Thanks for joining us today. Let's hop right in.
I got a little housekeeping though, guys. We're going to take some polls from you today, from the crowd out there in America. When you do that, there's going to be both a Q&A and a polling area to the right. So when it's time to answer the poll, answer to the right. Don't try to answer the text on the screen or you might freeze your screen. As my dad used to say, don't touch that. So a little bit of housekeeping.
Okay,
to get rolling.
Parent Corner done.
Parent Corner is done. Let's roll.
Let's roll with the Smarter Bank. And oh, surprise, it's a Taylor Swift concert that you all entered into.
Really?
Well, I wish it was. But
Wow.
sadly, all we can use is Ms. Swift as our North Star for the conversations today, because I think we have to acknowledge she is not a pop star anymore. She is now a movement. She's got people talking, thinking, and really aspiring to do some really creative and cool things. So as we think about the business of banking and what's taking place in this great industry of ours, I think we have to find inspiration from many sources, and Taylor Swift is the one that we've decided
So a
will use
smarter
us.
bank is the Taylor Swift of banking. Let's see what that is.
Let's
Let's
see
break it
that. Let's see
down.
what Travis Kelsey has to say at the end of this too.
So I want to tell you about this. I want to tell you a story about two $5 billion banks sitting here in the tough times of 2023. Legacy Bank just kind of plows it along, middle little bit of growth, knocks out a little bit of expense control, but not real breakthrough efficiency. Doesn't really change their franchise. Then there's Smarter Bank. Smarter Bank finds ways to grow faster. They find a new frontier of efficiency with digital first automation, data, AI, talented folks, and they find uniqueness in their franchise to get a higher multiple. When you add up growth, efficiency, and a better multiple over that period, it's $1 billion. So instead of being worth 700 million in 2030, go for the bank being worth 1.7 billion. This happens all the time. We want to break down how do we take this journey?
Yeah, we're going to break it down because where we are in 2023, we've got to have some outcomes that we drive towards. And those 2030 numbers, they might seem aspirational, but we're going to show you how to get after it.
The math can work.
So, this is not meant to be a conversation around saving your way to profitability. That's a fool's errand where we just start to compete on price.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what we want to do. We're not trying to commoditize an industry that, some people have already described as just another utility industry in waiting.
Mm-hmm.
We believe there's a great opportunity for banks, credit unions, and tech companies across this country to do some really meaningful work on behalf of consumers and commercial customers.
But here's the bummer. Let's go to the next slide. As we think about this right now, we're on this little thing called a 500 plus basis point ride up with the Fed. And obviously, we're seeing lower net interest margin, lower forecast earnings for 24. What the heck do we do? Well, we buckle down, but importantly, we keep investing. And right now, for all you executives, action item number one, my marketing executive, my data executive, my digital executive, they need to be joined at the hips and they need to be thinking about the digital front door to fight the deposit war. We can't just kind of get by in this rate environment. So action item number one, open up the digital front door. It's going to be higher rates for longer. We're in a deposit war.
Amen to that. And if you have any kids at home that walk in and see you looking at this slide, it'll probably scare them right out of the room. So, again, we're talking smarter bank concepts right now.
Mhm.
And I think we've got to be aware that there's some voices that are very prominent in the industry that are talking about the demise of the banking space.
Let's see one. Let's go to the next slide. Good old Matt Harris, right?
So Matt Harris is super smart. Bain Capital Ventures, incredible organization. So this is not a shot at Matt. This is something that I've been made aware of in various boardroom conversations. I know you've been as well. He has this kind of treatise on this fog of war that's coming in the fintech space that will bleed into what banks and credit unions have to deal with. Now, I want to take a little umbrage with the number that he uses. He says there's about 8,000 banks in the U.S. We crunch the numbers.
Right. There are 4601 banks and 4764 credit unions. So total financial institutions, 9365. Let's see what you guys think. We're going to do a polling question right now. Where do you think we land in 2030, 7 years from now? End of 2030, how many total banks and credit unions if we start with the 9365? Is it still more than 8,000? Is it 6 to 8,000? Is it 4 to 6,000? Or have we really got whopped and it's less than 4,000? Let's see what the crowd thinks. Let's go to the next slide while we let that polling question. We're going to let that run for about a minute, and then we'll come back and check the results. Let's go to our next slide, though. And it really ties in with the whole transformation competition. Our chief research officer, Ron Shevlin, has done some great consumer research in the last year. And he's found when it comes to a checking or payment or spend account, whatever you want to call that, 47% of those, Al, are getting opened at either challenger banks or fintechs and not at traditional institutions. Why? Easier customer experience and better marketing. Two things that we've got to up our game in if we're going to still be raising those core deposits.
Yeah, and let's just call it what it is. Ron's an incredibly smart guy, but he says Chime has won the war. Chime has won the deposit war. We got to be aware there's big names, big forces that are impacting the industry right now.
Yeah, and this is a wake-up call in terms of this consumer data because we don't even see it because some of this Gen Z is not in our client base. Let's check the poll results. All right. And it looks like most of us think we're going to be somewhere in the middle there, somewhere 43% in 6 to 8,000, 44% in 4 to 6. So some big consolidation, maybe not. We're not dead yet, as Monty Python would say.
Amen to that. So again, we're thinking smarter bank, and there's 5 pillars that we've been able to tease out of conversations throughout the past 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk to bank executives, some of them are saying, hey, it's not just the immediate future that we have to address, it's the long-term viability. How do we differentiate our business? How do we diversify our earning opportunities? And they've shared with us some of the tactics that they're considering.
Yeah.
We've tried to aggregate these for everyone's benefit.
Yeah.
There are 5 of them.
Yeah. And so, folks, we know every meeting we've been in, we have 100 consultants out on the street every day at Cornerstone. Deposit growth is job number one, priority number one. We're going to do a poll right now. What's priority number two? So if we could pop up our next poll, is priority number two, is it reducing expenses? Is it enhancing your digital transformation right now to support the growth like we need in deposits and customers? Is it putting the balance sheet to work on the asset side with higher yielding loans now that we've taken the wallop on cost of funds already? Or is it getting more out of your data for both efficiency and obviously getting more close to your customers?
So, yeah, we just say, like, pick one. Obviously, these are all important, but you've got to prioritize. And again, to Steve's point, we know deposits. That's front and center. But what's immediately after that is the question right here.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing all of these things right now. When it comes to coming expenses, it's not just expenses, but productivity. A lot of folks think they've got to keep investing in digital, or we're not going to be able to fight the deposit war. Let's see what the gang thought about priority number two, since deposits is number one. Wow, digital experience for the win. Interesting to see, because I think that's exciting that we're not going to cut back so much. It's going to be boring around these banks and credit unions. Let's jump into the 5 pillars of what a smarter bank is. So, pillar number one,
hyper efficient.
Let's go to the next slide if we could. Pillar number one, hyper efficient. I want to go on record saying I'm in favor of it, but how do we get there? I want to show you a little bit of data, Al. This looks at both the net interest margin and the non-interest expense in banking over the past 30 plus years. And you can see in the gray that net interest margin melts decade after decade, and now it's down to about 2.5% in this environment. And to make up for that, we get more efficient. And so our non-interest income expense to asset ratio also goes down. Now you trend line that through the PC era, the .com era, the mobile first era. Now we're in the generative AI era. We think you could look for margins around 2.5% on average, maybe the non-interest expense ratio 2%. So whatever your expense ratio is, take 50 basis points off for 2030. Go to the next slide. We see that today in the difference between low, medium, and high performers. So there are high performers out there with NIE ratios below 2, with low sub 50 efficiency ratios. And importantly, with more robots and digital self-service and automation in the future, here's a number to look at, executives, revenue per employee. High performers today are at 287, and now?
I think it's going to be up around 400,000 per employee by 2030.
It's got to be, because robots don't take mental health days, and there's going to be more of them in the future.
Well, they don't
take
right? them yet.
They don't take them yet till they unionize. One example, how are we going to get there? It's going to be across every department, every line of business. On the next slide, here's just one simple example. Typical $5 billion bank out may have 50 commercial officers. When we use our Cornerstone benchmarking and say, what about if we moved from median to the 75th percentile, what we call the high performer? In just a $5 billion bank, that unlocks $2.3 million of compensation and savings we don't have because our lenders are more productive. When you do that across every function, every line of business, that's how you free up the money for transformation.
Yep.
So if we go to the next slide, you've got a great example of someone who believes in the next wave of hyper efficiency.
Well, and we can send people to Plugged In, with the podcast series we've done. Jim Reeder's the CEO of First Bank. He shared his take on how he controls his tech destiny. Mm-hmm. I think it's really cool for us to think about using a word, discipline. Mm-hmm. He's been disciplined from the jump. Mm-hmm. So he's managed internally to set expectations around how technology provides great value to his customers. He was an in-house core developer. He's made a shift recently over to Finxact, which is a headless core that gives him flexibility to be what his customers need him to be. He doesn't have to wait in line for something to be updated. Mm-hmm. His entire idea is, let's be an open bank. Mm-hmm. And he was being an open bank long before that term became cool.
Yeah, great guy. We've seen them scale from 5 billion to 28 with great efficiency. Next pillar, folks,
Well, differentiated is a word that, it means things to, different folks. As a visual learner, I want to give you this example of how differentiated are we really?
Okay.
A little rom-com for you.
You like rom-coms, Al?
I secretly will watch one or two of these, but if I look at this Pretty Woman and a James Bond movie poster, they're going to be the same.
Also
Matt,
Matthew McConaughey with all his crappy movies.
hey, let's be careful about that. So I just look at this and it gives me that pause of if the movie industry
Hmm.
can take, not that many chances and is just going to create a brand that's very similar. It's comforting. You can walk into it. You kind of know what you're going to get. Are we accidentally doing the same thing as a bank?
Hmm.
I don't think we need to follow this particular pattern.
Yeah. And let's think about the smarter bank in the future. It may not be a bank in 2030. So a couple quick statistics out. Apple with their savings account embedded finance this year, probably one of the big stories. $10 billion plus of savings generated in about 5 months. They'd already have the CFPB coming in if they were a bank at that size. $4 billion of Apple Pay revenue now in 23. SoFi has gained 5 million new customers since the COVID lockdowns and more than quadrupled their size. And talk about good old Mr. The artist formerly known as Twitter, X, and Elon Musk and what they plan for
I thought there was
financial
an
services.
artist formerly known as Elon Musk because in the middle we have Twitter's rebrand to X, and everyone thinks that, oh, that's a new logo. If you've been reading Walter Isaacson's
Great book.
great book that he's put out about Elon Musk, you'll realize that X.com has been in circulation, at least in Elon's mind, since the 90s.
Hmm.
This is a guy who is willing to take radical risk
Hmm.
and somebody who, let's put people in space. Let's get to Mars. Electric cars for all. One bank for everyone.
Hmm.
That mindset of embedding payments into the X environment, of being able to do things with technology, we might think that he's crazy, but he is crazy smart and he's willing to take chances that I would bet none of us on this
Yeah.
are really willing to do. And so when I think about what's the future going to look like, there are forces that are around us right now that we have to acknowledge will get us out of our comfort zone,
Yeah.
even if we don't want to be out of our comfort zone.
Action item: have your chief digital officer watch the evolution of X. He has told his team he's going to take his $25 billion market value and turn it into $250 billion by going into payments and finance
And that payments thing has been going on in his mind for the last
for a
30
long
plus
time.
years.
Now, don't want to bum you out because there are rebels and mavericks out there thinking about differentiation at your size today. You've got a favorite down in Edmond, Oklahoma.
Well,
Go to the next slide.
what if I told you about a city block party that Jill Castillo was able to arrange in this little town of Oklahoma, where on a monthly basis she's able to bring vendors and the whole community out together. I looked at the math; they've got over 1 million different attendees for this. 2,000 vendors have been able to put about 44 million in economic development to this one thing that this community bank created.
Mhm.
And it's not just creating a fun party that lets people have a fun Friday night. It's around introducing a digital bank called Roger, which has been stood up to help the military community and really early enrollees into the U.S. military so that they have a financial health that maybe they wouldn't normally have.
Mhm.
She's somebody who took to Twitter back when it was still called Twitter and befriended Mark Cuban during the Triple P rollout, created some pretty interesting products,
Technology.
all doing this at a bank that's 800
800 million.
million in assets.
Yeah, when SVB failed, she cleaned up, taking a lot of great tech company deposit relationships across Oklahoma using the IntraFi network to keep it all insured. She's always leaning into that entrepreneurial side, and follow her on social because they'll give you inspiration. You can be differentiated in good old plain vanilla banking.
Absolutely.
Let's go to the third pillar, and that is we're going to retire the word agile. It got a little bit worn out, but you like nimble.
A little stale, but nimble, it blends that concept of being fast, of being ambitious, and of, maybe being opportunistic, which I know is a future pillar of ours.
Yeah, and not one executive I talked to in strategic planning, we're not real proud of our speed to market right now. We're trying to get better. If we go to the next slide, let's kind of put this visual in our mind. And that's Apple. Every year another release. Sometimes we think about technology transformation as these events and then we can rest when it's over. Apple can never rest. If the 15 was a year late, someone would really be in trouble. We have projects that are a year late all the time. So how do we get that speed to market? Action item for executives on the next slide. Make sure you start to build a release mentality in your organization. Very visual in your organization should be your customer experience and operating capability release roadmap. What's going to happen Q1, Q4, and hold your team accountable to this. Make this transparent. Make this a United Wave thermometer for your whole employees. And of course, share this with your board because this is the kind of development and speed to market. And we have a friend and a CEO in banking who really got serious about speed to market like this. Why don't you tell the team group about Brent?
Well, Brent Beardall runs WAFED, and if Brent was here, he'd acknowledge when he, kind of stepped into his role, this was a bank that was not tech forward. In fact, it was as much a laggard as probably you could describe. But they have changed the narrative and have said, look, we've got to have a plan to get, to 2025 and have some incredible, opportunities to serve our community and our customers. What he did, which I think we can all take, some lessons from, is to look at his existing tech team, his IT department, and say, "You're already stretched to the max.
Right.
I can't expect to put something more on you." So he stood up Pike Street Labs, which is now part of Archway.
Mm-hmm.
Pike Street is interesting in that it was 12 to 15 engineers that were hired in, all product focused, all around living and learning in near real time as to what resonated with the clients that WAFED serves. And it really changed the dynamic of the tech mindset within the organization.
Yeah, and I think that's an action item for executives. The folks that are doing the plumbing of IT, they've got to do security, infrastructure, scale. You need a separate product company to deliver a digital experience, customer experience, data integration. We had a question, I think, come in.
Well, even as we wait for the question, I would say one big takeaway from Brent when he stood up Pike Street is he was saying, look, we used to say, here's a problem and here's how we want it solved. He realized, wait, that's the wrong setup. It's we have to say we've identified a problem, but now you tell us how you're going to solve it. And it's a subtle shift, but it's made real impact.
So Ray Wheeler from Civista Bank, what's the difference between, say, digital banking today and where we see it in the future? And when I think about that question and thinking about Brent, in a nutshell, a lot of it's going to be about integration, channel integration, where the branch of the contact center is in the know with what's happening with digital, better integration of products. So things like brokerage and banking are connected, and a lot more usage of data. The connection between our customers' data and digital experience today pretty much sucks. And so I think it's going to be that connecting and integration. And that's where you're going to need a team that's your glue, data integration UX inside the bank or credit union.
Yeah, that goes to design thinking.
Yeah.
Right. So we've got various quotes where we can, pull from, but I like this one that's coming
Sir Johnny Ive,
a friend of yours. Exactly.
Well, I like to say my daughter worked at Apple. Every product that went out the door when Sir Johnny Ive was there, it was his authority. He either approved the product or not. The question I would ask is, who's got design authority inside the typical bank? Usually we design by committee, and then we get something that looks like a committee designed it. So we're going to need to bring in this talent that knows how to design digital banking customer experience.
Yeah, and I noted a comment from the CEO of Ally last year, and he said, look, it takes a lot of effort to make something look effortless. And so it's all of our responsibility to understand just because Apple can do it doesn't mean that we're going to be able to flip the switch and do it overnight.
Yeah.
But you can create that mindset that we're going to put in the effort because you control effort and you create control attitude.
Yeah. Just find the talent, people you trust their design decisions. That's what we need on the customer experience side. Pillar number 4. And that is being data driven. I don't think anyone would doubt that, but here's a poster child, Al, in my opinion, on data driven. Capital One started long ago by two geniuses, Richard Fairbanks and Nigel Morris. They were consultants who were trying to get banks to use data better. No one would listen, so they started their own bank. And now today, Capital One does 80,000 data analysis per year. That's quite a bit. But importantly, Capital One has no data centers. They've moved all of their tech infrastructure to the cloud, not just for speed to market, but also so they can take their data, integrate it with other data, become that smarter bank.
I mean, it's an incredible story. And again, it's not to crash through an open door and say data has to be a priority in your organization, but it's thinking about how Capital One has exited profitable segments because the data gives them confidence that in the future, it's not going to be where they want to be.
Right.
And if you want to see others trying to emulate them, get outside the U.S., look at Nubank down in Latin and South America and how they basically modeled their business after Capital One, and it's almost like a Capital One 2.0.
Right. But our message is not you have to be big to succeed like a Capital One or someone else, but you've got a little troublemaker up in the Pacific Northwest, right?
Well, there's a lot of troublemakers all over the place. It's really a matter of, who do we want to talk to? I actually would prefer to talk about a troublemaker at a bigger bank.
Okay.
So
that's right.
Is Brian Moynihan going to make an appearance in a Cornerstone event?
Yeah.
I know that we normally aren't putting big
Yep.
banks up on a
There's a
pedestal,
great
but
quote from Brian Moynihan, but if we could, I think I jumped in. Let's go back to that scorecard if we could. This is something I love about B of A, even though they're 2.5 trillion. Every quarter, they show their shareholders, here is our report card on digital transformation. So if you'll look, 51% of our sales are now done through digital. We do more Zelle transfers than we do customers writing checks. We had some jokes about Erica when we first came out with AI and chatbots.
yep.
Hey, last quarter we did 18 million Erica transactions. Executive action item for you guys. Where is your digital scorecard? Are you elevating this to the C suites? Are you sharing this with your board that the transformation is making progress? Does your team have this across the organization like a United Way thermometer?
And again, keep it simple.
Mhm.
Yes, keep it simple. This scorecard right here, anyone can look at and understand. Hey, to your arrogant point, it was clunky. People were taking victory laps at its
Right,
expense. Now look at it; it is crushing it,
right.
and you can get that in all of 5 seconds.
Yeah. Now, there is a rebel I mentioned earlier. I was kind of thinking outside the box in terms of order, but tell us about Eric Brink and the world of Coastal Community Bank.
Well, Coastal is one of those really, kind of creative, challenging organizations that sees opportunity and acts on it. So Eric is a wonderful entrepreneur who listens well, asks a lot of questions. He will say yes and then try to figure out how to make it work.
Hmm.
And I love that mindset. It's not no, it can't work, but yes, tell me more. And so with Coastal, they're in the best space. So there's about 80 banks that are doing banking as a service right now. Eric and I were together a few days ago, and he said, "Hey, Al, look, there's about 20 of us that are doing it professionally." Professionally for him means 10 plus tech, companies on their platform, 5 plus years of having the
The
diligence and
compliance side.
compliance side of things. They've gone through regulatory, cycles, and so they're not phased when new things come. What that gives them is access to data and insight. They're opening deposits. They've got brands that are tying back into Coastal. Coastal does things with One Financial, which is
Mhm.
basically Walmart. So you think about how a $3 billion bank in Everett, Washington takes the leap. It was because they saw trends in technology and said, I want to participate and I want to get into that.
Yeah.
And again, it goes to that smarter bank concept of let's figure out not just where we are today, not just where we are in the future, but who's doing some really creative, compelling work that we can jump on and
And
participate
add
in.
some value.
Yeah.
Goes to our fifth pillar, guys. Be opportunistic. We are going to go through whether it's stagflation, higher for longer, a recession, but coming out of that, there's always opportunity. And for Cornerstone, we're going to talk about this more out in the future. There is a new world in IT that we all have to manage. It's no longer, let's just call Fiserv or FIS or Jack Henry. They're going to be involved, but around that, you're partnering with fintechs more and more, and you have to bring that integration in. You are looking at venture funds and investing in them. You need other talent outside the big four in things like integration and development and customer experience, and you need experts to help you implement. All of that needs to be done with a team internally that understands enterprise integration, data, customer experience. So we have to transform that world as well. So more to come on that.
Yeah.
What I'd like to say though is we got to mix the gene pool, and we wanted to show an example of mixing the gene pool right at the top of the house.
Yeah. And so, we talked about who's going to be the bank in the future. Well, SoFi's board of directors, I think, is a really interesting example to look
Mhm.
at. Think of most community bank boards.
Right,
Now think about SoFi's: three VCs, five technologists, and only three bank executives.
right,
All that allows them is an opportunity to take a different risk stance, to be more creative when it comes to funding and financing
yeah.
tools. It's a mindset that starts at the top that can trickle through the entire organization.
Yeah, when you've got folks who started places like Stripe and Salesforce and Shopify, they're going to have a lot of pressure at the board level on what are you doing in terms of getting new product and experiences out the door. And they'll understand some of that execution risk taking and the investment in tech it's going to take to be that modern, smarter bank player.
Yeah, so for bank boards, if they're this is a great opportunity for them to say what's worked in the past may not be what takes us forward. So let's not become complacent. Let's push
Yeah.
and let's really encourage our leadership teams to evaluate how ambitious is the
Yeah.
strategic plan that they have in front of us.
All right, last troublemaker of the day, someone who gets this new environment where tech collides with traditional banking.
I mean, this is a guy that would be the first to say he's not a technologist, but my goodness, Chip Mahan, who started Live Oak Bank, has certainly done some incredible things in the tech world.
Mhm.
Live Oak Bank gets stood up because he decided to bank veterinarians and folks who own funeral parlors. Not necessarily
Some
the
niches.
sexiest, not necessarily the sexiest niches, but was able to figure out how to do SBA lending to them. In the course of doing all this, realized there was an opportunity to create more of a dynamic relationship. That's where Encino got its start. Encino starts to go. It went public a few years ago.
Commercial lending automation for the folks at home.
A lot of banks and credit unions use Encino right now. Of course, that's not where he's going to stop. Finxact is a headless core. It's being used by First Bank, Jim Reuter's organization. But Finxact is just one of a portfolio of things that Chip's done. Canopy Ventures. Another thing that Steve alluded to, how do different venture groups come together, get LPs to put money in so that tech companies and banks can get a little closer together. Canopy is a really cool example. It all starts with Chip, who says, look, I know a lot, but I know a lot less than others do. So let me surround myself with the talent that's going to build great businesses. And if there's one thing that I respect about Chip, is he knows how to build a team.
Yeah. So executive action item, don't think you have to be a technologist. Appreciate it. Start to surround yourself with some of that transformational talent that you need and apply it to great challenges like commercial automation being the number one SBA lender, building out a headless core, or having banks collectively invest in new fintechs.
Yeah. Now we've got about, I think, 2.5 minutes left. And so we want to leave everyone with kind of a parting gift. We've been talking with a number of people about generative AI and the practical applications, the possibilities that are being seen right now. You and I have just got off a conversation with a bank CEO who talked about the dynamic of, we've got quarterly earning pressures, but I also know that this is going to materially impact our business.
Right.
How do I create some balance?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this?
I think this is the term right now is let's figure out the use cases. I think the executive right now is he who learns or she who learns fastest wins. So I would have a mandate to my entire middle management team. You need to start learning about this stuff. We'll give you some exposure and training like a South State Bank has done for their management team. Then you have to decide what are the use cases in your area? Who are the players out there that I need to know and talk to? And how do we start to build that new capability? So I think it's a challenge from you at C-suites to your middle management team. AI will be about fast learning middle management teams, and they can really kick some butt in the future, I think.
Yeah. And I just think everyone has an opportunity to roll up their sleeves and do it themselves. Try it out. Take some time. Do it on the weekends. This is one of the things that's most interesting and exciting about the industry. It's not a chore to have to learn about this.
Yeah. And I think this is the thinking that we think we don't have the resources. We think we don't have the earnings power. In the nooks and crannies of what we do every day, Accenture says 54% of what bankers do could be automated by AI. Maybe they're a little salacious, but let's go down that journey. There's a lot of frontier for latent revenue and better efficiency. And I think we'll end with the last slide here.
Yep.
We think this is what a smarter bank might look like in the future. This is an ongoing conversation, though. We do want to give you the stories, though, of a Jim and a Jill and a Brent and an Eric and a Chip, because they're out there. They're imaginative. They're creating all kinds of shareholder value. And this game is not going to end with 10 big banks who don't pay attention to us. It's going to be about modernizing the grassroots.
Exactly. Now, we've gotten questions that have come in throughout. So we realized we had asked for about 30 minutes. We're going to close everything down in a moment. You and I can probably stick around, try to answer some of the questions that have come in. If anyone wants to hang,
if anyone doesn't have to go there next Zoom, we'll do a little after hours Q&A. But we have thanks for those who came.
We have one last poll, because this one, I think, kind of lines up with our creative Cornerstone spirit.
Done real quick. We love music at Cornerstone. So good old John Sahagi, Chief Data Officer at Baxter Credit Union, wants to know who's the most data-driven musician. John is a data geek, and I know he also plays in a new wave band. So is it Bowie? Is it Moby? Is it Dr. Dre? Or is it good old Trent Reznor? Little fun before we close today, folks.
And as much as I love Dr. Dre, I'm going Moby on this one.
I'm going Moby. He's a weird bald guy, but he loves data, and he always seems to have a laptop in front of him. Let's see if Moby won.
Well, look, folks, we appreciate.
Wow, it's just a dead heat between Moby, Dre, and Bowie. So,
we're going to be doing these things again in the future. Folks like Ron Shevlin will be making guest appearances. We thank you for your time. We're going to be sending out a link to this. If you have questions, obviously you can reach out to anyone at Cornerstone. We'll do our best to elaborate on some of these points. As we said, stick around if you want some after hours, Q&A.
Look, in October, we're going to be talking about core system transformation, one of the big things out there from the industry standpoint. Get Cornerstone's take.
But we, again, just want to say thanks for taking the time.